God bless the Middle East at the end there. Good luck. They're going to need it, because this is the very beginning of clearly something Donald Trump thinks, and let's all hope he's right, Donald Trump thinks is a decisive, seminal, historic moment, not just for Israel, not just for the hostage families and hostages, not just for the Palestinian prisoners being released, not just for Gazans who have at least some relief from the bombardment and the fighting that's been going on, but there's a hell of a job to rebuild Gaza. But that ending there, a little tinge after an awful lot of sort of vaunting language and vanity and self-congratulation, and we'll talk more about exactly what was said in a moment. But an interesting and I think useful way to finish, hopeful way to finish in that last line. God bless the Middle East and good luck as he heads now to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for those peace talks. Benjamin Netanyahu won't be at those peace talks. There were some reports earlier on today that he would be. That would have been quite the picture, wouldn't it? With him at the peace talks alongside all of those Arab leaders as well as Donald Trump. But that photo isn't to be. But there was an awful lot to get into. There is an awful lot to get into in that speech. It was a full-throated celebration of Israel itself. It was a full-throated celebration of himself, his team, of the hostages, the families. But in it, both militarily and socially, I guess, as well, there was endless material there for his and Israel's enemies, both in the Middle East and around the world. I'm joined by Dr Azriel Bermant, a senior researcher at the Institute of International Relations, Prague. He specialises in Anglo-Israeli relations and security, and is the author of a book called Margaret Thatcher and the Middle East. He's based in Jerusalem. Thank you for joining me today. I wonder what Margaret Thatcher would have made of that speech.
Well, it's interesting because Margaret Thatcher came to office as a very strong friend of Israel, but over time she, because she was a friend and was seen as a friend, was willing sometimes to, when she felt there were things to criticize, she wasn't afraid to voice them. Now, Donald Trump is interesting because Donald Trump right now he can do no wrong in Israel as far as the Israeli people are concerned. Now with this deal that has been reached, with the fact that all the remaining living hostages have all been released, but the fact is, Donald Trump put Netanyahu in the corner, pressured him. Netanyahu wanted to keep the war in Gaza going. He didn't want to end the war. He was afraid of the fact that once the war ends, he will face reckoning, that they will be pushing pressure for an international commission of inquiry. But Trump said, enough, this war has to end. Of course, you also have to give Trump credit for using his leverage with countries such as Qatar, Turkey and Egypt. And they put a lot of pressure on Hamas to release the hostages.
Is it you mentioned Qatar there, is it your understanding that failed attack by Israel in Qatar on the Hamas mediators was a turning point as far as Donald Trump was concerned, when he would wade in and say, enough now?
There is little doubt that the attack in Qatar was the turning point. I think this was a major embarrassment for President Trump. Netanyahu simply went too far. And this was an attack on a US ally, but there was also an attack on the negotiations to end the war and get the hostages released. It failed, but as a result of this, as you could say that every cloud has a silver lining, and here perhaps because of this failed attack, it got pushed Donald Trump to put pressure on Netanyahu to say enough of this war. You've got to stop fighting. This has to end. You've got to get the hostages out. The only way to get the hostages out is through a deal with Hamas.
And it's worth remembering, isn't it, that while clearly the lion's share of focus was, and certainly is today, on hostages and their families and the people of Gaza during the 2 years of fighting that's gone on, it's worth remembering the other arms at the other sort of fronts on this war. There was the Hezbollah explosions. There was the Iranian, the US-Israel bombing of Iranian nuclear installations. Now, Donald Trump alluded to that with great pride in this speech, didn't he? Saying that if he hadn't done that, there would have been no deal.
Right. So the question that President Trump gave Israel enormous amount of support, particularly with Iran, allowed Israel to attack the Iranian nuclear facilities, and then the United States itself became involved, attacking the Fordow nuclear facility, which was much heavily fortified and required US participation. And then he brought the war to an end. He said, okay, this war has to end. He got Israel to recall its planes, and Iran is certainly weakened, far weakened. Also, the Iran altogether, as a result of the October the 7th, Iran's proxies have been hit everywhere. I mean, actually, ironically, it's Hamas in Gaza, which was seen as the weakest proxy, which had the strong, more staying power in fighting Israel
than Hezbollah, than the Houthis, than Syrian agitators. Yeah. Can I ask you the degree to which you think Donald Trump is right or not about the weakening of Iran? Because he was presenting it in that speech as though to say, what we've done to Iran has left the way fully clear for an Arab, Israeli, US, global, in fact, coming together. And that with Iran still strong and still breathing down Israel's neck in the Middle East, and Hezbollah doing the same, it just couldn't, it could not have worked. It was all about undoing the Abraham Accords, essentially.
Exactly. I mean, the Hamas and also the Iranians, the October 7 attacks were to a certain degree all about stopping the normalization process. And this actually succeeded because the entire normalization process was put on ice. And in fact, there were with the attack in Qatar, there were serious signs actually that of number of countries actually withdrawing from the Abraham Accords. So basically, essentially, now what Trump is saying is that maybe this is the underlying takeaway from his speech, though he took an enormously long time to get there, to say, the war, enough, stop the fighting. Israel has far more to gain from peace. Far more to gain from regional cooperation, and now the war. Let's stop the war. Let's widen the normalization process. And in fact, there is no question that the best way in the long term to deal with the threat from Iran is to actually strengthen Israel's ties with other countries in the region, and that is including also the possibility of a missile defense, air defense regional coalition, which has been talked about for some years now.
Donald Trump also, it feels a long way off, but who knows? He alluded to the possibility of peace with Iran. I mean, I doubt that's massively high on Israel's agenda at the moment, but it was something that he threw into the very busy mix there in that speech, wasn't it?
Well, it's certainly not on the cards in the short term, but important to remember that before the Islamic Revolution in 1979, Iran was actually, to some degree, was an ally of Israel. The Shah of Iran was certainly had ties with Israel, and the Iranian people. If you look at the Iranian public, there is a certain. If you look at the wider public, there is certainly a certain amount of positive sentiment towards Israel, which may be surprising to many people.
Because a lot of people in Iran, particularly women perhaps, are under the boot of that regime, aren't they? So no wonder they're pleased with Israel.
Yes, but at the same time, the attack on the Iranian attack on the Iranian nuclear facilities were actually not supported by many of these people, because they see it as this actually strengthened the Ayatollahs. So there is a lot of ambiguity, a lot of sort of ambivalence
Can I shift?
Over that.
Can I shift our focus a little to the UK's place in this huge prism of events and people? Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, was on TV over the weekend being interviewed, and she alluded to a behind-the-scenes role by the UK in this peace deal and in the peace talks, which are about to begin in Sharm el-Sheikh. Initially, Mike Huckabee, the US ambassador to Israel, poo-pooed it, but then enter Steve Witkoff, who was hugely praised in this speech by Trump. Steve Witkoff putting out a very sort of generous tweet about the UK's involvement, particularly mentioning Jonathan Powell, who will have been involved in the Northern Irish peace talks from memory. And he named him, he alluded to his skills in particular. Do you think, given that we know that Blair might be part of this as well, do you think that they will have an important role to play, however small it might seem in the grand scheme of things?
Well, I think Britain can have the fact that Britain has had experience, for example, in the decommissioning of arms in Northern Ireland, IRA, and that certainly is expertise that could come in be very useful. Although I would sound a note of caution, because Hamas, I think the case of Hamas disarming, I think it's highly unlikely. I mean, that is probably one of the hardest tasks still ahead in terms of the process going forward from here. But I think Britain has expertise, and certainly I think it's certainly something that Britain can play a role in. One other point to make, by the way, is the fact that Keir Starmer's recognition of a Palestinian state, which was strongly criticised in Israel. It is interesting that the Trump administration as a whole has not really doesn't seem to have a major problem with Starmer's decision.
Well, they certainly haven't laboured it, have they? I think they did make some reference. I think that Trump made some reference to it in the Chequers speech, didn't he? But it was with a kind of lightness of touch rather than putting the boot in.
Yeah, and in fact, in the 20 points, the Trump's 20-point plan, there is, the fact is that there is a readiness for an eventual establishment of a Palestinian state.
Yeah, the end of the list was if these things, if we see reform, if we see this, if we see that, we can talk about a Palestinian state.
Yeah, we have to admit, but Netanyahu's government, at least his government, makes it very clear that under no circumstances
it's a no from him.
Can there be a Palestinian state. So this is this could be a potential problem for the government if Trump. The question is, where will Trump go? And I think the worry is that will he lose his focus? Will he keep it? And it's hard to know. Certainly, if the Trump administration remains focused, then I think this has potential to move forward.
Yeah. He likes success, doesn't his own, I mean, and if he feels it's providing moments like today in the Knesset, he'll stick with it. I mean, I think there's more to it than that. It's not just vanity, but there's a great deal of vanity in there, isn't there, as well?
Also, the Trump administration might have noticed that the booing when Steve Witkoff mentioned Netanyahu in the speech in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv, there was this booing, and they will surely take a note of the fact that Netanyahu was standing in Israel. He's increasingly unpopular, and then there's a lot of anger over what happened on October the 7th. The fact that Netanyahu has never taken responsibility for what happened, and the release of the hostages was always a lower priority for him. And of course, he continues to remain opposed to any state commission of inquiry. So I think Trump will have seen that he is loved by the Israeli public, but that Netanyahu is a figure of, these are quite very popular in many quarters.
And in the speech, just finally, Donald Trump did allude, didn't he, to the possibility of a different leader. My support is steadfast, essentially, unless, of course, you get a terrible leader in Israel at some point, and then I'll have to think again. But again, you're right to mention those boos, but in that room, apart from one heckler who was dispatched early on in the speech, he was full of praise for Netanyahu, wasn't he? Not least towards the end, appearing to ask for a pardon for Netanyahu, which will go down like a cup of cold sick in Israel, I would imagine.
Yes, I mean, so he's very good at, flattering Netanyahu and keeping him happy. But then he did what he did, pushed him into the corner and forced him to agree to this deal, which Netanyahu didn't want to do originally. Let's be honest. I think Netanyahu was pinning his hopes on Hamas rejecting it. So
yeah, he has the heft as president of the United States, and he's clearly used it.
Yes, exactly. So, and you mentioned Margaret Thatcher at the beginning, and of course, this is the centenary of her birth, and back then, Thatcher tried to get Ronald Reagan to put pressure on Israel, so it's like in some ways there is, and so Trump is actually doing now what Thatcher wanted Reagan to do. The question is Trump going to follow through, or is this it?